Have you ever wondered what truly happens after death? Not the familiar stories you hear in churches or textbooks, but the hidden truths whispered by ancient Gnostic texts. What if the soul does not simply vanish, nor immediately ascend, nor descend into a fixed fate? What if there is a journey, a transformation, a mysterious threshold that occurs specifically 3 days after death, deliberately hidden from the masses for centuries? Imagine a knowledge so profound that those who recorded it risked persecution, and yet fragments of it survived in secret collections, like the Nag Hammadi codices, waiting for those who dare to seek beyond the veil. For centuries, the Church presented a simplified narrative. Death is the end of the physical body, and the soul's destiny is immediate heaven, hell, or purgatory. But the Gnostics, mystics who studied divine knowledge in secret, proposed something very different. They wrote about the soul's journey through spiritual layers, encounters with guardians of hidden knowledge, and transformations that unfold in precise rhythms, 3 days being a pivotal moment. Could it be that what we call the third day is not just symbolic, but an actual mystical stage of the soul's awakening? As we dive into these texts, you'll notice something startling: symbols, rituals, and metaphors that reveal a complex understanding of life, death, and rebirth, an understanding the mainstream has largely ignored or suppressed. What did the Gnostics see in those first 72 hours that the rest of the world missed? What warnings and revelations were encoded in their writings, designed to guide the soul through trials unseen by ordinary eyes? And how might this ancient knowledge, preserved against the odds, change how you think about death, your spirit, and the very nature of reality? In this video, we will uncover the layers of this hidden knowledge, exploring the journey of the soul 3 days after death, as described in ancient Gnostic texts. You'll witness how history, secret manuscripts, and spiritual symbolism converge to reveal a truth that challenges everything you thought you knew. By the end, you may see death not as an ending, but as a gateway, a sacred passage, a moment of transformation that has been deliberately obscured for centuries. If you're ready to follow this journey and explore these hidden revelations, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Join us as we uncover mysteries that were meant to remain buried and step into a world of knowledge that awakens the mind and the spirit. For centuries, the knowledge of what happens to the soul after death has been tightly controlled, shaped by institutions that feared the implications of spiritual awakening. The Gnostics believed that the soul is not a passive observer, but an active seeker, capable of traversing realms of existence that ordinary teachings often ignore. Ancient texts suggest that these truths were deliberately hidden or distorted, simplified into easily digestible narratives of heaven, hell, and judgment, stripping away the intricate map of the soul's journey. Scholars note that the Church often removed, burned, or altered writings that hinted at these deeper mysteries, framing them as heretical, dangerous, or irrelevant to the faithful. But why? Perhaps it was because true knowledge threatens the comfort of unquestioned authority. Because once people understand the soul's potential, they are no longer bound to passive belief. The concept of the 3 days after death emerges repeatedly in Gnostic manuscripts, though often hidden behind symbolism or coded language. For instance, the Nag Hammadi texts, discovered in 1945 in Upper Egypt, contain descriptions of the soul's ascent through multiple layers of reality, guided by spiritual intermediaries and tested by cosmic forces. Some scholars interpret these layers as levels of consciousness, not physical locations, suggesting that the soul undergoes purification, awakening, and preparation during the crucial 72 hours after departing the body. Here, death is not instant. It is a transformative process, a liminal period where the soul begins to discern its true nature and confront unseen forces. The Church, however, frequently omitted these details from mainstream teachings, presenting death as a binary event, salvation or damnation. Gnostic thought often portrays invisible guardians or archons as gatekeepers, influencing the soul's path and obstructing its progress if unprepared. These spiritual entities, the texts imply, enforce rules unknown to ordinary believers. They operate subtly, shaping the soul's perception and testing its understanding. The hidden problem, then, is not merely physical death, but the concealment of the steps the soul must take in the first 3 days to navigate these forces. Without this knowledge, a soul may remain trapped in confusion, repeating cycles of ignorance or missing critical opportunities for spiritual awakening. This is why the Gnostics stressed initiation, teaching, and careful guidance knowledge that was deliberately obscured over centuries by those who sought to monopolize spiritual authority. As you reflect on this, consider your own understanding of death. Have you accepted only the version presented by tradition? Do you feel a sense of curiosity, a pull toward discovering what might have been hidden from humanity for millennia? Many seekers today report a profound shift when confronting these ideas. The third day is not merely symbolic. It is a moment of decision, of transformation, of initiation into truths long suppressed. How would your view of life, faith, and the afterlife change if you knew that for 3 days? Your soul is traversing a sacred threshold, observed and guided by forces both benevolent and challenging. The journey into this hidden knowledge begins with understanding what was lost and why it mattered. Only by recognizing the distortions imposed by authority and tradition can we approach the revelations preserved in secret texts. If you've ever questioned the official story of life and death, you may already sense the significance of what the Gnostics preserved. The first 72 hours after death hold secrets that could illuminate not just the afterlife, but the very nature of your consciousness. To understand what happens 3 days after death, we must turn to the texts themselves. The Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in 1945, contains writings such as the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Philip, and the Book of Thomas the Contender, which describe the soul's journey in astonishing detail. These texts reveal that the soul does not simply vanish, but begins a transitional voyage immediately after leaving the body, encountering both light and shadow along the way. Some scholars believe that the first 3 days are crucial for the soul to awaken to its true identity, to separate from attachments and illusions, and to discern the divine spark within itself. These 3 days, they argue, are not arbitrary. They mirror a natural rhythm of transformation, a symbolic period of gestation and rebirth before the soul ascends to higher realms. Symbols in the texts give subtle clues. Water often represents purification, fire conveys illumination, and thresholds mark points of decision. The Gnostics describe psychic gates that the soul must pass, guarded by archons who test its readiness. Some interpretations suggest that these gates are not literal, but correspond to inner states of consciousness. In the first 24 hours, the soul detaches from the physical body and confronts lingering attachments. In the second day, it faces judgment, not by an external deity, but by its own awareness and understanding, reflecting the Gnostic emphasis on self-knowledge or gnosis. By the third day, the soul is prepared for its next stage, whether a higher ascent or a return, having integrated lessons of detachment, discernment, and clarity. The texts emphasize that without guidance or awareness, the soul may be delayed, confused, or even trapped in cycles of repetition. Historical evidence confirms that these ideas were once widespread before the consolidation of orthodox teachings. Early Christian mystics, some of whom were later labeled heretics, preserved instructions for navigating the post-mortem journey. Rituals, prayers, and symbolic acts performed at the deathbed or during funerary rites were meant to assist the soul in crossing these stages safely. Archaeologists and scholars studying burial practices in Egypt, Greece, and the Near East note repeated references to 3-day vigils, chants, and protective amulets, all designed to guide and protect the soul during a critical 72-hour period. The Gnostics saw this not as superstition, but as practical spiritual science. Precise actions could help the soul recognize its divine nature and avoid being ensnared by false authorities or deceiving powers. Some of these texts were written in cryptic language to prevent misuse by those unprepared for such knowledge. For instance, the Gospel of Philip speaks of bridges and paths that the soul must find, often couched in metaphor. Scholars note that these descriptions align with mystical traditions across cultures, suggesting that the 3-day period is not an isolated Gnostic idea, but a universal observation of the soul's transitional journey. When we understand the symbols and stages, the process becomes less abstract and more accessible. The first day detaches, the second discerns, the third ascends. These are moments when the soul encounters both revelation and resistance, awakening to truths that ordinary teachings leave unspoken. As you consider this, ask yourself, do you feel these stages are symbolic, or do you sense a real spiritual rhythm at play? Could it be that this hidden knowledge, preserved for centuries, holds insights not only for the soul after death, but also for understanding life, consciousness, and the unseen forces that shape our world? The Gnostics believed that awareness of these stages could transform the living, guiding actions, priorities, and spiritual understanding. The first 72 hours, they claimed, are a sacred threshold, a liminal space where destiny, awareness, and freedom converge. To grasp the 3-day journey after death, we must understand the language the Gnostics used, a language of symbols, metaphors, and hidden meanings. The archons, often described as cosmic rulers or gatekeepers, are central to this narrative. These forces were not necessarily evil in a moral sense, but represented the obstacles and deceptions that prevent the soul from recognizing its divine origin. Some scholars interpret archons as external forces, others as aspects of the mind that cling to fear, attachment, and illusion. In either case, the Gnostics emphasized that the soul's awakening requires discernment, courage, and knowledge gnosis to navigate these challenges. The concept of the demiurge also plays a role in understanding the distortion of the soul's path. In Gnostic cosmology, the demiurge is a lesser creator figure who maintains the material world and enforces rigid structures, often obscuring the truth of the higher realms. Some Gnostics believed that the Church itself, in codifying and controlling spiritual teachings, unconsciously served as an extension of this system, simplifying death and afterlife narratives in ways that diverted attention from the transformative journey. By presenting salvation as a single, immediate outcome, the institutions effectively removed the focus on personal spiritual awakening and the intricate work of the soul during the first 72 hours. Symbols recorded in funerary texts reinforce this hidden process. Light, often described as emanating from the soul or the divine spark within, represents awareness and guidance. The number 3 itself is highly significant, repeated in Gnostic rituals, hymns, and cosmology. 3 layers, 3 trials, 3 aspects of the soul. These patterns reflect an ancient understanding that transformation is neither instantaneous nor arbitrary. Water, fire, and thresholds symbolize cleansing, illumination, and transition. The Gnostics believed that without recognizing these symbols and the stages they represent, the soul might wander or fail to fully integrate its lessons, leaving it vulnerable to stagnation or misguidance. The turning point in these texts is striking. Despite centuries of suppression, certain manuscripts survived, hidden in caves, private collections, and secret libraries. These texts reveal a profound truth. Death is a sacred, structured passage, and the soul's first 72 hours are designed for awakening. The Gnostics saw this as a moment when the soul is closest to perceiving its true nature, free from the distractions of the material world, yet still vulnerable to forces that distort perception and truth. Modern readers may find it difficult to accept, but the alignment of symbols, rituals, and layered teachings points to a coherent understanding of death that was deliberately obscured. Reflecting on this, consider how your perception of life and death has been shaped. Have you been taught to fear death or to see it as an abrupt conclusion? The Gnostics invite a different perspective. The first 3 days are sacred, a period of preparation, discernment, and liberation. What forces today might still obscure your understanding of the soul and its potential journey? By recognizing these symbols and the hidden systems of distortion, you begin to glimpse the ancient wisdom preserved against centuries of suppression. The first 72 hours after death are not a mystery to those willing to observe, question, and seek the gnosis that the world has often tried to bury. The most profound insight preserved in the Gnostic texts is the revelation of the soul's transformation. During those first 3 days, a stage so crucial that it was almost entirely erased from mainstream teachings. The Gnostics described this period as a sacred threshold, a liminal space where the soul encounters both its divine origin and the forces that seek to obscure it. On the first day, the soul detaches from the physical body, feeling the remnants of earthly attachments and unresolved emotions. It is a time of reflection when the soul must recognize the illusions it has carried throughout life. On the second day, the soul confronts tests, often symbolized as guardians or archons, who challenge its awareness and readiness. Only through discernment and inner gnosis can it navigate these encounters, integrating the lessons of attachment, desire, and fear. By the third day, the soul reaches a point of clarity, an awakening that allows it to ascend to higher realms of consciousness or return with profound insight for those who are reincarnated. This revelation was deliberately hidden, in part because it challenged the authority of religious institutions. If ordinary believers understood that the soul's journey required active awareness and self-knowledge, the passive obedience encouraged by orthodoxy would lose its power. The Gnostics preserved these teachings in coded texts, allegories, and secret rites, emphasizing that spiritual awakening is earned, not granted. Some manuscripts even contain instructions for the living, how to prepare the dying, how to recite prayers or hymns to assist the soul in its journey, and how to recognize the symbolic markers of the 3-day transformation. Modern scholars studying these texts note remarkable consistency across regions and centuries, suggesting that this was not myth or superstition, but a carefully observed pattern, a rhythm of consciousness acknowledged by initiates for millennia. The implications of this revelation are profound for the living. If the soul undergoes such a structured process, it means death is not an abrupt event, but a sacred interval where spiritual maturation occurs. By understanding these stages, we can approach death with less fear and more intentionality, preparing ourselves and others for the journey that awaits. Reflect for a moment. What would it mean if your awareness, your understanding, and your actions in life could influence how your soul experiences those first 72 hours? This is the essence of the Gnostic message. Knowledge transforms experience, even beyond the veil of the physical world. Moreover, this revelation reframes how we perceive morality, purpose, and spiritual responsibility. Death is no longer a sudden judgment imposed externally, but a continuation of the soul's learning, guided by inner wisdom and cosmic patterns. The Gnostics saw this as an opportunity for liberation. The third day is not simply a passage, but a revelation of the soul's potential to transcend illusion and connect with the divine spark within. Some scholars argue that these texts contain coded instructions for cultivating awareness even in life, preparing the soul for the inevitable journey that every human must face. Ask yourself, have you ever considered that the first 3 days after death are a spiritual window, a time when the unseen forces converge to test, guide, and awaken the soul? How would your understanding of life, your priorities, or your spiritual practice change if you knew this hidden knowledge existed? The Gnostics believed that those who ignore this threshold risk being unprepared, while those who embrace it gain insight, clarity, and liberation. It is a secret preserved for centuries, waiting for seekers willing to question, explore, and awaken. Understanding what happens in the first 3 days after death is not just an abstract or historical curiosity. It has real implications for your life today. The Gnostics believed that the journey of the soul reflects the inner journey of consciousness, meaning that how you live, how you perceive reality, and how you cultivate awareness directly impacts your spiritual path. The first 72 hours after death, they argued, are a microcosm of challenges we face in life: detachment, discernment, and awakening. If the soul must confront these stages immediately after leaving the body, then living consciously, seeking knowledge, and cultivating understanding are essential practices even before death comes. It is as if the secret of the third day exists to teach the living that preparation, reflection, and awareness are the keys to navigating both life and the afterlife. The symbols preserved in the Gnostic texts invite contemplation. Fire represents illumination, light symbolizes knowledge, and thresholds indicate points of transition. When you see these symbols in rituals, hymns, or ancient writings, consider that they are not merely decorative or allegorical, they encode practical guidance. The soul's journey 3 days after death is structured, precise, and intentional. Imagine for a moment that for 72 hours, your soul is tested, guided, and observed. Are you prepared to face your own attachments and illusions? To confront the forces that might obscure your understanding? The text suggests that awareness, courage, and gnosis can determine the outcome of this sacred period. This knowledge was deliberately suppressed by institutional powers, but fragments survived, waiting for seekers like you. Reflect on this. If the first 3 days are crucial, then understanding them changes everything about how you view death, spiritual responsibility, and the nature of the self. How would your daily choices shift if you truly believed that every attachment, every illusion, and every fear could follow you into that liminal space after death? Some scholars believe that these teachings were practical guides, not esoteric fantasies, meant to help humans navigate the thresholds between worlds. The Gnostics were not afraid of death. They saw it as a teacher, a mirror, and a passage to liberation. As you consider this hidden truth, think about the forces that might still distort your understanding. In life, as in death, there are invisible archons: fear, attachment, and false authority that cloud perception. By recognizing these forces, you begin to reclaim knowledge that was buried for centuries. Every insight you gain, every symbol you understand, every reflection you undertake is a step closer to awakening the divine spark within. This is the essence of the Gnostic promise. Knowledge transforms not just the afterlife, but the life you are living right now. Ask yourself, are you willing to explore these thresholds, to confront the forces that obscure your awareness, and to awaken your consciousness? The Gnostics left these secrets intentionally hidden, but they survive in texts, symbols, and traditions that you can now access. By reflecting on the first 3 days after death, you are not just uncovering ancient mysteries, you are connecting with a living tradition of seekers who dared to know, who dared to see beyond the veil, and who remind us that knowledge, discernment, and awareness are the greatest gifts we can cultivate. The journey of the soul during the first 3 days after death, as preserved in the Gnostic texts, is more than a historical curiosity. It is a revelation that challenges the way we understand life, death, and spiritual awakening. The texts reveal that death is not an abrupt end, but a sacred, structured passage where the soul confronts illusions, tests, and guiding forces. For 72 hours, the soul moves through thresholds of consciousness, encountering archons, learning to discern truth from deception, and awakening to its divine spark. This knowledge, hidden and suppressed for centuries, reminds us that our awareness, choices, and preparation in life have direct influence on our spiritual journey beyond the physical world. Reflecting on this, consider how much of what you have been taught about death and the afterlife is simplified, incomplete, or deliberately distorted. The Gnostics left us coded guidance, symbols, and teachings to navigate this threshold, showing that the first 3 days are not symbolic. They are real stages of transformation, meant to awaken the soul to its true nature. How would your perspective change if you embraced the idea that death is not something to fear, but a sacred passage where preparation, awareness, and knowledge matter more than anything else? Could understanding these hidden stages inspire you to live with greater consciousness, intention, and courage? If this exploration has stirred your curiosity and awakened questions in your mind, I invite you to participate and keep these truths alive. Comment below with your thoughts, reflections, or even a personal prayer acknowledging the mysteries of life and the journey of the soul. By sharing your insight, you become part of a community of seekers who honor and preserve hidden knowledge. Like the Gnostics, who carefully preserved these teachings against suppression, your engagement is a way to honor the wisdom that has survived through the ages. Subscribe to the channel and join us in uncovering more hidden revelations, ancient mysteries, and esoteric truths. Every comment, every reflection, every share keeps the spark of knowledge alive. Ask yourself, what other secrets remain buried, waiting for those bold enough to seek them? How far are you willing to go to understand the hidden rhythms of life, consciousness, and the soul? The search does not end here. It is a journey, and each discovery opens the door to deeper understanding. Remember, the first 3 days are only the beginning. The deeper you explore, the more the mysteries reveal themselves. Are you ready to continue seeking, questioning, and uncovering the truths that have been hidden for centuries? Your journey of discovery has just begun.